Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast today. So excited about today's episode. We're talking with Pastor Steve Bland, and we're talking about dealing with staff and church conflict. That is something we all deal with. How do you deal with the staff conflict when there's issues there? But what happens when there's that conflict in the church? What's the steps you need to take to help handle that to minimize the damage? It's a great episode. Let's jump into it. How can I help you today? What's on your mind?
Well, I met with a youth pastor last week, and he really just kind of dumped the rocks out of his shoe. You know, he had a lot of frustration. There was an issue that arose in his church, a conflict, let's say.
Yep.
And it was to a degree that he's like, I need to bring in the lead pastor. And so as he confronts this media leader, and he's kind of over this area, they really went at it. And the youth pastor just kind of backed up and just took it, and he wasn't combative. But the lead pastor did not support him at all. And in fact, afterwards, he kind of chewed out this youth pastor saying, you know, thanks for dragging me into conflict.
Right.
So, I think, conflict is part of church life and leadership. And I think there are a lot of pastors that could use some help with how to handle conflict. So my first question is kind of twofold. How do you handle conflict with staff? And then the follow-up, how do you handle conflict with congregants?
Yeah. No, that's great. There's a couple. One thing I always say, Steve, is that messages inspire, but systems change behavior. I think when you're looking at the staff, the fight for continual health and the fight for continual alignment is so important among a staff. The book that I released last year was Saving Your Church from Itself, 6 Subtle Behaviors That Tear Teams Apart. That subtitle, to me, is the key. 6 subtle behaviors that tear teams apart. Watching those subtle behaviors that you think are going to start turning into conflicts, I think, are important. But when conflicts arise, one of the things I talk about with systems is I always tell everybody, matter of fact, I had a board meeting yesterday. And if you look at if I had my board meeting minutes, I could forward them over to you. And at the very top, it would say Matthew 18. We always bring it up every meeting. Okay, this is our Matthew 18 moment. Is there anything we need to deal with in this room? Is there anything that's going on? Matthew 18, go to your brother at once, is something that, in my opinion, should live on every single staff agenda and every single board agenda, because it constantly reminds us and it gives us a moment to talk about, is there any conflict that's happening here, or is there any conflict we need to resolve maybe privately? I think that's an important part. When dealing with one, I think that helps to keep short accounts. Now, that doesn't answer the fact that there's still going to be conflict, but I think it helps to keep short accounts. And you have to put in systems to help keep short accounts and to keep people reminded that we can't keep having conflict. Yeah. So when you're talking about conflict in the staff, one, I think that's a way of minimizing the conflict. I don't think it's going to alleviate it, but it's going to minimize it tremendously. When dealing with the conflict, I think we follow, one thing I always tell everybody is don't be afraid of the conflict. Because if you, a lot of people, I think sometimes, Steve, are afraid of the conflict. That's hard, that's difficult. But the longer you wait, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
So one thing I always say is pay now or pay later. But if you pay later, you'll always pay more.
Oh, wow.
The longer you wait, worse it's going to get. So you can wait. You can wait another month, but just understand it's just getting worse. Wow. And I think you need to really be careful with that. So what I tell staff is, now on the staff side, I say, hey, look, when people talk about conflict or keeping staff health or alignment, I always say live by the Matthew 18 principle. Let it live. Let it be part of your culture. Culture is, and when people say culture, it's a buzzword. It actually means a set of attitude or behaviors. So let it be Matthew 18. Let it be that we keep short accounts. Let it be that we live far away from artificial harmony. Never enter into mean-spirited, but always live far away from artificial harmony. If you've got to deal with conflict, never go in attacking, but don't be afraid to deal with it. But never go in attacking. I think it's so
good.
much better, and I know it's a cliche, but to seek to understand. So if I had a conflict with someone, I might say, Steve, I'm feeling something in my heart. I could be wrong, but I'm feeling A, B, and C. And I was wondering if you could speak into that for a moment. That phrase right there has saved me many times
So
where I just
good.
say, Steve, here's kind of what I'm feeling. Can you speak into that for a moment? I'm immediately asking them, I want to hear from you
Yeah.
what's going on. I'm concerned with what you're feeling. That phrase, can you speak into it? As it pertains to the church.
Yes.
Now we're going to move to the church. That was staff. Now we're moving over to the church.
Yeah.
One, I think that culture is always created at the top, supported at the bottom, and lost in the middle. So when it's lost in that middle section where it's lost, sometimes I think when we deal with the church and there's members that have problems or issues, one, I would say when it is established among the leaders of the church and the staff, there's a greater chance that it will go down into the life of the church. Yeah. When it's not happening at the leadership level, there's a greater chance that there will be a problem. So what I mean by that is a lot of the time, if the staff will hold true to like, hey, we're not going to have conflict. We're gonna handle it. We're gonna keep short accounts. We're gonna live by Matthew 18, not live in artificial harmony. And the leaders start living that way. You'll find so much less conflict in the church when you get the staff and leaders to start operating in that fashion. The church is just going to follow the leadership. They are. Even in the invisible DNA, they're going to follow the leadership. And so if you can learn to say, hey, man, we're going to make sure that our staff and our leadership is operating health, you'll find that a lot less will happen that way. And here's the other thing you'll find is when having that conflict, you'll find that less will come to you as the lead pastor, because now your leaders are they're not leading from a point of accountability from top to bottom. They're also leading from left to right. And what that means is most of the time there's a conflict. Pastor, here's the problem. We expect for you to step in. That's top to bottom accountability. But when there's health among the staff when it comes to conflict, the accountability is not just top to bottom, it's left to right. So it's like I, as a leader at your church, pull aside another leader or volunteer and say, hey, man, I'm noticing something and we need to be careful with that. I'm not your boss, but I'm just trying to help. Like what I'm doing right there is I'm saying, hey, let's watch that. That doesn't need to go all the way to the top every time.
Yeah.
Because now we're handling it this way. We're not just handling it top to bottom. We're handling it from left to right. When leaders start doing that in your church, when that's the culture of your church, you're going to find a radically reduced amount of conflict will happen in the church because people will follow the leadership.
Yeah, I'm actually reading Sam Chan's Change the Culture.
Oh, man, he's my coach. So, Sam Chan and Dan Ryland, they're both my coaches. So, yeah.
Wow. That's beautiful. So I love that. So you create that culture from the top and it just flows down.
It
so
does.
Good.
Absolutely.
So good.
Yeah.
So a follow-up question is, that's conflict, but sometimes it gets past a point of just a conversation and it goes to correction. So how do you correct your staff, let's say?
Yeah.
Correcting your staff, correcting key leaders maybe that aren't staff but volunteers. There's a difference there, I suppose. So
yeah.
Can you talk to me about correction?
Yeah, these are great questions, Steve. They really are great questions. The correction, I think, obviously, it varies on the severity of what we're talking about. If you're talking about a behavioral issue that's toxic, the correction goes way high. If we're talking about you're probably not leading really well and you need to approach things a little differently, okay, that might drop down a little bit. The correction of it, I think, is also in how it is verbalized and how it is dealt with. Again, no matter what, in when you are working with your team, one thing I always say is, again, that seek to understand. So, hey, there's a little bit of conflict between me and Steve. I was wondering if you could speak into that. I do that also when I feel like there's a correction moment. Here's why: because consulting is about providing solutions. Coaching is about asking questions. And I think that there's a hat you have to put on sometimes as a lead pastor or leader of an organization, and be able to put that hat on that says, I need to coach for a moment. And so I'm going to ask some questions. So if it's a correction thing, it might be, I'll role play here. I'm the lead pastor, you're the youth pastor, or you're the children's pastor, whatever. And I say to you, hey, let's say it's man, the way you've been kind of handling it, a little bit of leaders, or maybe it's been a performance issue for you. Maybe you're not coming, you're not delivering, I don't know, not following through. Yeah. I don't know, whatever it may be. Again, I'm going to follow into that same pattern. Hey, Steve, I've been noticing a couple things. I've been noticing that you show up late quite a bit, and you seem a little bit more apathy in our meetings. Like you don't want to be there. At least it's coming across that way. I could be wrong about that, but it feels that way to me. And I was wondering if you could take a few minutes and speak into that. Here's why you want to do that. Because I had to do this quite a while ago with a certain individual on a team of mine. And I said, hey, here's kind of something I've been seeing and noticing. And within 90 seconds, I don't give them 30 minutes of these are all the issues, and and I went through that when I was your age. I don't go through all these examples. Within 90 seconds, I turn it right over to them. So, hey, here's some things I've been noticing in our meetings. Here's some things in your responses. I've just been kind of noticing that. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on in your life, but I noticed there's been a shift, and I'm wondering if you could speak into that for me. Steve, that person, I'm not going to say it works out every time this way, but that person, a lot of times, and it did for me just a while back, they'll go on for about 10 minutes explaining what their feelings are. But you know what happened in the middle of that? They said they were going on, and yeah, I know sometimes, it affects my attitude, and sometimes my attitude can get bad because of it. And then they went on to explain more. Now they get done 10, 12 minutes later, and I said, okay, Steve, about halfway into what you were just sharing, you said sometimes you have a bad attitude. Can you talk to me about that a little bit more? I didn't say you had a bad attitude.
Yeah.
You said you had a bad attitude. All I'm asking is you to explain it to me. It completely changes the tone of the conversation, because I'm not accusing you of the bad attitude. You're the one that admitted it to me. Now we're going to talk about that. And then when we get into that, again, using that as an example, man, how do you think, Steve, moving forward, we could resolve this? Because I don't want to revisit this again. And I don't want it to be an issue anymore. So how do we move forward resolving it? And then we collaborate on okay, look, these are the 4 things. Okay, we agree to these 4 things, right? Okay, great. Now, as we wrap this up, we both agreed to the 4 things. Oh, yeah, no, we did. And we both agreed this is what we need to do. Great. I'm going to check in with you and in 30 days. And I'm just letting you know we've got to make some progress in this area. Now, that's where I get a little more accountability, a little strong at the end. But you lead them in the conversation to that. People support whatever they create, and if they create this solution, they're more likely to support it.
Do you do written write-ups, anything like that? If it continues, so you have kind of a paper trail.
I do, 100%.
Yeah.
So the way that I paper trail it, great follow-up question, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I would have hated to have missed that. Okay, again, role playing. I'd say, hey, Steve, everything that we talked about, I do one of 2 things. Either A, I recap the conversation, but often I'll put it on them, because I want to make sure I want to make sure that they heard what I said. So, hey, Steve, sometime by the end of the day, could you just send me an email to recap the conversation? I just want to make sure that you and I are hearing the same things.
That's good.
So you send me a recap. Now, if I look at it and I'm like, nailed it. You got everything in there. I'll say, hey, man, you nailed it. Look, thanks so much, Steve. Appreciate it. Looking forward to great things, blah, blah. If you missed 1 or 2 things in there, I was like, oh, you missed a couple things. I'd say, hey, Steve, look, you got almost everything. Don't forget also, we talked about this. Now there's an email trail.
So they write their own trail.
100%.
That is so good.
100%.
I
They
love
write their
that.
own trail. And you only add to it. You either say, looks good, thanks, or looks good, but you missed one bullet point. Either way, the trail started with them. They're the ones that, and we're making sure that we heard the same thing. So absolutely you do. It's not it doesn't feel like a write-up. It feels like a recap. There's a difference between a write-up and a recap. A write-up feels like, man, you're disciplining. A recap is, I believe in you. I just want to make sure we're hearing the same thing.
Yeah, you're cracking them with the ruler on their knuckles, you know.
Yeah, and that's not it.
That's
I'm
tough.
I'm recapping.
That's tough.
But it's in writing now. It's in writing now. And that recap is not only so it's in writing, it's also to make sure that we heard the same thing in the meeting. Because, sometimes they hear something different and you're like, wait a minute, that's not what we
got to
heard.
make sure on the same page. And
but recaps are wonderful.
Direction.
They're great.
So this leads me to another question for you.
Yeah.
What if it builds and you've got to part ways? You know, maybe it's a lack of chemistry, or maybe it's for cause. How do you let your staff member go?
Yeah,
because I think pastors really struggle with this sometimes. Some pastors struggle with this.
Ironically, it's interesting you say that. Earlier call today that wasn't a podcast was on this very same subject, and it was, in my opinion, not done healthy. It was done wrong. Let's go back to the recap. When I recap it, remember I said at the very end, I'm just going to keep going with this scenario. So I recap Steve. Hey, recap me, and then I always do that sort of thing. Hey, just Steve, we agree to these things, right? I need you to recap me, but please understand, I'm going to meet with you in 30 days or whatever I decide, because I got to make sure that these things are right. We've got to make some strides. So this is, to me, is kind of a strike one. It was pretty strong. Yeah. Okay, 30 days from now, 40 days from now, whenever I say I was going to follow up, I'm going to come back, and if it's good, great. If it's not, now it's moving from discussion and it's on its way to decision. That's the difference, discussion or decision. So now I'm going to look at you and say, hey, Steve, we met 45 days ago, or whatever the amount of time is. If you remember, here's the recap we talked about, These things haven't changed. And, now you have to decide, do you want to talk to them about it 2 or 3 times? But at some point, whether it's the second time or the third time I talk to them, and it depends on the level. It depends on how many other conversations you've had. It depends on, whatever. But when you get to, I wouldn't go too long, but when you get to that kind of strike 3, or you're in that neighborhood of strike 3, I'm just telling you how I do it, Steve, because I want them to know. I think to be unclear is to be unkind. And I think that you have to say to someone, Steve, we've talked about this a couple times. We've recapped it. We've created solutions together. If we have to meet about this again, I don't think you're going to like the outcome. And they always know what I mean. No one ever has to. I mean, everybody always knows. Then when it comes down to it, and if they don't do it, Steve, we've met a few times on it. Things haven't changed, and it's time for me to transition you off of the team. One thing I've learned from my coaches over the years is when it comes to that difficult final conversation, don't patronize them by going on and on for 20 minutes, them knowing the axe is coming and you're going on for 20 minutes. Whenever I do it, I don't like doing it, but whenever I've had to do it, it's in under 3 minutes. I've already said the sentence. Under 3 minutes.
Pull the Band-Aid off.
Just say it. They already know, man. I mean, I not all the time, but 80, 90% they know. And you're patronizing them for 20 minutes. And I love you and I believe in you. And I think that's great to say after. But I think, for me personally, I find it better just get to the point. They already know, man. Pull the Band-Aid. They've been waiting for you to pull it for 20 minutes. Just pull it. And
what about if it's just a lack of chemistry? You know what I mean? Because that scenario was kind of for cause. We've talked about this here. I've got a paper trail, whatever. Strike 3, as you said. But sometimes you hope you're going to click, but you never really know until you bring them on. So what about that scenario?
Well, 2 thoughts. One, I think, and I'm going to go to 2 thoughts on that. One, on the back end, if you're in that scenario, it's not a performance thing. That's a little bit different. I think you need to be careful legally, and I think you have to be careful in how you handle all that. I'm not a lawyer, nor am I going to say how to handle that, but I do think that it is a matter of, hey, I don't feel like it's the right fit. I don't feel like that we're the right fit. I don't think that's a you issue. I don't think that's a me issue. That's just an us issue. It's like, there's a certain man and a certain woman that maybe they're wonderful people and they both love God, but they're definitely not the right fit to be married because they're just different. Yeah. It doesn't make her wrong or him wrong. They're just different. And I think that's where we're at. And I want to, I extend quite a bit more. I would extend quite a bit more grace of like, I want to help you find the right spot. As long as they're not being toxic, as long as they're not being whatever, either I want to help you find the right spot. In those situations, generosity of severance gets even greater. Yeah. And here's why that gets even greater. Because I have to own some of that mistake. I brought you on. Yeah. I have to own the fact that I hired someone that didn't have chemistry with me. I got to own some of that. And I can tell you how you can avoid that in the future, or at least avoid a lot of it. So the back end of it is, yes, I would give more grace. I think I use the word fit more than anything. Definitely give more grace on severance, more grace on trying to help them find another job. I've done that, whatever, just more grace. However, and I've learned the hard way this, I wish I can't say I've operated like this all my life, but to avoid a lot of that in the future, I'm just going to try and do it under 2 minutes. There are 3 types of values. There's core values, aspirational values, and accidental values. Aspirational values are the values that we all have that we just call values. They're just really aspirational values. Our church is going to be Bible-centered, generous. We put God first. Well, that's aspirational because not everybody in your church does that. It's an aspirational value. The core values are who you are as Steve Bland and your team, no matter what. They are not defined, they're discovered. It's who you are no matter what. So for instance, I had an outsider come in years ago to look at our team. And do you know what we discovered? One of our core values was we were relevant. We were outreach minded. No question about that. We were risk takers. No question about that. We want to progress. We want to grow. Growing is important. One of them was humor and sarcasm. And then I looked at the guy that we brought in. I've known the guy for a while. We had to pay him some money. And I said, what do you mean humor and sarcasm? And he's like, well, that's who you are no matter what. And if someone isn't that, then they're not going to fit. And then you're going to have to let them go, even though they moved their whole family here. You're going to have to let them go because there was no fit. So the reality is you have these people look and say, do you believe in these values? Love God, put them first, be generous. Who's not going to every Christian's going to go, yes. That's aspirational. What you got to know, Steve, is who are you no matter what? You couldn't not
That's
be
so
that.
Good. Yeah.
And church I was working up with coaching and helping, one of their core values was we do life as a team. Well, man, do they? I mean, their staff like vacation together. They go to the river together. They jet ski together. Well, if you're going to invite someone on the team that doesn't do that, that is going to be a major issue. And that's not their fault. Yeah. It's actually more your fault for bringing someone that didn't fit. So that's good. Okay, that's that end that we talked about what to do with the fit and then have that conversation and graciousness and generosity and all that. But to help before you even get there, know the 3 or 4 things that you are no matter what. You cannot not be that. Like me, humor and sarcasm. I cannot not be that. So that's part of our teams. So it's like, okay, if you're not that, then that's going to be a problem. Okay, we're very future-oriented, very risk-taking, very growth-oriented. And if you come to me on the team and you're like, man, I don't care about growth, as much. I mean, I just want people to love Jesus. That's not going to work for me. I like the idea that we want people to love Jesus, but if you're not future growth-oriented, that's a chemistry issue. Yeah, so you got to know who are you no matter what. Because once you identify those core values, it'll help you in hiring people, not just are they good and can they do the job, but do they fit in our core values? And if they don't, the funniest thing was the guy that we brought in for that core value, and he told me humor, sarcasm, I pushed back with him. was about 9 years ago. I'm like, dude, that's not true. I go, what are you talking about? He goes, that's who you are no matter what. And I go, well, what does that matter? He goes, well, who's the last person you had to let go of? So I'm like, okay, not a person in your organization. You had to let go of him. And bro, this is what happened. He goes, and why'd you have to let go of him? I said, I immediately responded. I'm like, the guy can't even take a joke. And he goes, he can't take a what? And he goes, and he had me. He trapped me. Nothing to do with his performance.
Wow.
It was.
That's really good.
He didn't match the core values. Know your core values or you'll hire the wrong people.
So good.
Yeah.
Well, man, I really appreciate you helping me today and helping so many other pastors and churches. It's really, really important for us. So thank you for
awesome.
your time today.
No, thank you. Thanks. These questions were gold, man. Great questions. And thanks for being on, man. I really do appreciate it, Steve, and appreciate all you do for the kingdom, man. Thanks so much.
We'll talk soon.
Okay, buddy. Talk to you soon. Thank you for tuning in to the Fly on the Wall podcast. We hope today's episode provided you with some practical steps to lead your church to the next level. If you found this episode helpful, take a moment to leave us a review and share it with others. Remember, when the pastor grows, the church grows, and we grow pastors. We love you. We're your raving fans, and we are cheering you on. See you next week.